Rain had been punishing Elizabeth for 3 hours, transforming her traveling dress into dead weight against her trembling body. Each turn of the wheels through thick mud was a battle, but she couldn't stop. Not when Thomas had only 3 days before being expelled from Eton. Not when Rosalie cried every night, knowing she would never have a debut ball or a respectable proposal. After hours traveling alone in the family's old carriage, Elizabeth finally arrived. Lightning illuminated Holloway Manor, Gothic towers carved against the furious sky, windows like dead eyes except for a solitary light on the 3rd floor. Elizabeth knew the stories. The mad Earl who had lost his wife 5 years ago. The man who wandered the corridors talking to ghosts. But the solicitor had mentioned something else. He had been searching for a governess for months. Not that I recommend it, Miss Harrington. The man is disturbed, and he lives alone, without adequate staff. It would be rather improper, don't you think? Improper. As if anything in her life could still be considered proper. She had spent the entire day traveling to the estate, each mile taking her further from any possibility of returning before nightfall. When the storm began, it was already too late to turn back. Perhaps it was fate, or perhaps just another terrible decision in a series of them. The door opened before she knocked a 3rd time. There was no butler, only him, the Earl himself, holding a candelabrum that cast dancing shadows across his face. Elizabeth caught her breath. Nicholas Whitmore was younger than she had imagined, 35 perhaps, with dark beauty that tragedy had only accentuated. Impeccably groomed black hair despite the late hour, gray eyes that seemed to see through her. Lightning illuminated the mansion, Gothic towers against the furious sky, empty windows except for a solitary light on the 3rd floor. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Governess. That was all she would ask for. An honest job, a modest salary, but enough to keep Thomas in school and give Rosalie some chance. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you also love Victorian stories like I do? So tell me, what part of the world are you watching from? Don't forget to like, it really helps the channel and shows you want to see more stories like this. If you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to the Countess Tales and turn on notification bells so you don't miss any new stories of love, secrets, and redemption. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will touch your heart. The door opened before she knocked again. The Earl himself, of course, there was no butler. Elizabeth held her breath. She had expected to find a man disfigured by dementia, disheveled hair, wild eyes. Instead, she saw ruined beauty, aristocratic cheekbones too sharp from deprivation, gray eyes that seemed to see through her, impeccably combed black hair despite the late hour. He wore a dark green velvet robe over a linen shirt, as if he hadn't slept in days. Or years. Those gray eyes assessed her with surgical precision. Miss Harrington, it wasn't a question. I recognize your family's features. Your father played cards here once, lost 300 pounds in one night. He stepped back, opening the way. Come in before you catch pneumonia. The hall smelled of candle wax and loneliness, furniture covered with white sheets that looked like crouching ghosts. He guided her to a sitting room where fire crackled in the fireplace. Drink. He offered her brandy without waiting for an answer. It will warm your body. Elizabeth drank, feeling the liquid burn. Nicholas sat across from her, waiting, patient as a cat watching a mouse decide its next move. I came to ask for employment, my lord, she finally said. As a governess. I heard you were looking for one. I was looking some months ago, none accepted. I suppose my reputation isn't very good. He tilted his head. Sir James Harrington's daughter really appears at my door, soaked, alone, late at night looking for employment? Elizabeth raised her chin. My father decided his life wasn't worth living 3 weeks ago. He hanged himself in his study when we discovered he owed more than 20,000 pounds. The house was seized, the servants dismissed, everything sold, and still the debts. And your siblings? I remember James had 3 children. Thomas is 14. He's at Eton, but will be expelled in 3 days if the tuition isn't paid. Rosalie is 16. She's with Aunt Prudence in Bath, who only accepted her for appearances, but has made it clear she won't spend a penny on her." The words came in a torrent now. "I sought help from everyone. Cousins, my father's friends, acquaintances. Closed doors, polite excuses. No one wants to associate with the family of a man who took his own life in debt." "So you came to the Mad Earl?" There was no bitterness in his voice, only statement of fact. "I came to the only place where there was still a possibility. I know it's improper. I know I should have come during the day with a chaperone, but—" Her voice broke. "I don't have the luxury of propriety, my lord. I need to work. I need to save my siblings." Nicholas stood, walking to the fireplace. He remained silent for long moments, flames dancing across his profile. "A governess's salary won't save your siblings, Miss Harrington. £5 a month, perhaps 6. It would pay some bills, not an Eton education." Despair engulfed her. Of course, she had been foolish to think. "But," he continued without turning, "there is another possibility. I need something more than a governess." He turned, facing her. "I need a wife." Elizabeth nearly dropped her glass. "Pardon? There is a clause in my father's will. I must produce an heir before I turn 40, or all the Holloway lands revert to the crown. I have 2.5 years for that." He sat again, maintaining a respectful distance. "I propose a business arrangement. Marry me. Your siblings will have everything. Thomas continues at Eton with all expenses paid, and Rosalie will have a London season with a generous dowry. In exchange, you live here as my wife, and, when you're ready, if ever you are, we try for an heir." Elizabeth stared at him, looking for signs of madness, but found only cold pragmatism. "Why me, my lord? You could have anyone," she asked. "Who?" He laughed without humor. "What respectable family would give their daughter to the Mad Earl? To the man whose wife preferred to throw herself from a tower rather than continue living with him? You're the first woman of noble birth to cross this threshold in 5 years, Miss Harrington, and you came because you're as desperate as I am." "And if we never manage to have a child?" she asked. He thought for an instant and answered, "Then I'll lose everything. But your siblings will already be secure. It's a risk I accept." Elizabeth considered. "But this is madness, my lord," she said, for it was all she could manage to say. "Yes." He smiled without humor. "It's not for nothing they call me the Mad Earl." "And when would the wedding be?" "Tomorrow. The local vicar can marry us at dawn. The sooner the better for your siblings." She took a deep breath and with her heart racing responded, "I accept." "Very well, miss. Welcome to Holloway Manor." Chapter 2. The Haunting Past. Elizabeth woke in the blue room, still trying to believe it was real. The heavy ring on her finger, a sapphire surrounded by black diamonds, proved it had been neither nightmare nor imaginary salvation. Lady Elizabeth Whitmore, Countess of Holloway. The transformation from desperate governess to countess had happened in a matter of hours. The dawn wedding had been quick and somber. The vicar trembled so much he nearly dropped the register. The 2 witnesses, generously paid villagers, didn't dare raise their eyes. Nicholas had remained impassive throughout the ceremony, pronouncing the vows with a clear but distant voice, as if reciting the terms of a business contract. But he had fulfilled every promise immediately. Before breakfast even, messengers had departed. One to Eton, guaranteeing Thomas's permanence until graduation. Another to Bath with generous funds for Rosalie and clear instructions to her aunt about the family's new status. Now, a week later, Elizabeth wandered the corridors trying to understand her new home and her enigmatic husband. Nicholas maintained a peculiar routine. Present at meals, courteous but distant, then disappeared for hours without explanation. Sometimes he vanished all morning, other times all afternoon. When questioned, he responded vaguely about estate matters and changed the subject. The house was gradually coming to life. Nicholas had hired some servants as soon as she arrived. Hughes, a retired London butler who seemed immune to superstitions. Mrs. Brennan, an Irish cook who insisted on preparing banquets for 2 people. Mary, a young widow who served as lady's companion. "A countess needs a proper household," Nicholas had said simply when she thanked him. Thomas's letter arrived 2 weeks later. "Dearest Lizzie," he had written, "the headmaster called me personally to say my expenses are paid through university. He mentioned your new title and said the Earl of Holloway is a man of honor, regardless of what people say. But what do they say about him, Lizzie? Why does everyone fall silent when I mention his name? Also, it seems you sold yourself to this man. Why didn't you tell me about this marriage?" Elizabeth knew she needed to speak with her siblings, but that conversation would have to wait. She was still folding the letter when she heard the music. Faint, distant, but still unmistakable. Piano. The Moonlight Sonata floated through the corridors like a melodic ghost. She followed the sound to the end of the east corridor. The white door was ajar. She peered inside and her heart clenched. Nicholas sat at the piano, playing from memory, but his hands trembled over the keys. The room was a feminine sanctuary, pink and gold, with fresh roses impossible for October. Dresses arranged as if their owner might return. Perfumes and jewels arranged on the vanity with obsessive precision. He stopped playing without turning. "You may enter, Elizabeth." "I know you're there," he said calmly. She obeyed, stepping cautiously on the soft carpet. It was her favorite music, he said, fingers still hovering over the keys without touching them. Marguerite played every night before bed. She said it calmed her nerves. His voice was strangely flat, emotionless. It didn't calm them enough in the end. "Nicholas," she began to speak. "Do you know what they say about that night?" He stood, going to the window, keeping his back to her. "That I pushed her. That my jealousy and obsession drove her mad until she preferred death to continuing with me." "I don't believe that." He gave a bitter laugh. "You should. Perhaps not with my hands, but—" He turned, and Elizabeth saw something wild in his eyes. "I pushed her in every other possible way." Silence weighed between them. Elizabeth waited, sensing he needed to say this, to expel the poison he carried. "We tried to have children for 3 years, he began, voice low but controlled, as if reciting medical facts. Each month was hope followed by disappointment. Marguerite began to blame herself. I said it didn't matter, but—" He paused. "I was lying. It mattered. I needed an heir, and she saw it in my face with each new disappointment." He returned to the piano, fingers tracing the keys without pressing them. Then she became pregnant. The joy was indescribable. Finally. Finally, everything would make sense. His voice hardened. "She lost the baby at 7 months, a boy. Perfect, but lifeless." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. Marguerite collapsed. She stopped eating, speaking, leaving the bed. "I brought doctors, specialists, tried everything. But she just faded. Day after day, a little more." His hands closed into fists on the piano. "And I didn't know how to reach her. How to bring her back." "Nicholas, you tried—" "Tried?" He turned abruptly. "On a stormy night, she asked me to hold her. Just that. Hold her while she cried. And I—" His voice broke for the first time. "I said I needed to check the estate books. That I'd return soon. They were lies. I just couldn't bear to see her like that, so broken, so destroyed." The silence that followed was deafening. "When I returned 2 hours later, I found the room empty. The tower window was open and rain pouring in uncontrollably, and near the parapet—" He took a folded paper from his pocket, yellowed and stained. "I found this." Elizabeth took the note with trembling hands. The feminine, shaky handwriting said, "Forgive me, Nicholas. But I failed as a wife. I also failed as a mother. I cannot continue failing you. I free you from this prison. May you find someone who can give you what I could not. M." "She thought she was a prison to me," Nicholas said, voice hoarse. "That she was trapping me. And perhaps she was right. Perhaps if I had shown less need for an heir, less disappointment, less—" He stopped, running his hands over his face. "She chose to leave me, Elizabeth. She preferred death to continuing to live. And that opened a hole here." He pressed his fist against his chest. "That I don't know how to live with." Elizabeth approached cautiously. "She was ill, Nicholas. Postpartum melancholy is real and can consume. I know that now. They said nothing I did would have changed the outcome, that her mind was broken in ways we couldn't fix. He looked at the preserved room. But knowledge doesn't close holes. I come here every night. I talk to her. I keep everything exactly as it was because... He hesitated, vulnerable for the first time. Because if I stop, I'll have to accept that she really chose to leave, that I wasn't enough to make her want to stay. Elizabeth felt her heart break. Not for Marguerite, but for the man before her carrying guilt that wasn't his. Nicholas, look at me. He obeyed reluctantly. Her choice wasn't about you not being enough. It was about the pain she carried being too great to bear. You didn't fail her, she said categorically. Then why does it still feel like I failed? The question came out as a broken whisper. Because you loved her, and love makes loss even more devastating. Elizabeth touched his arm lightly. But punishing yourself eternally doesn't bring her back. It only ensures she took 2 down when she fell, not 1. Nicholas looked at her hand on his arm, then at the preserved room, then at her again. Something changed in his eyes. Not healing, but perhaps the first glimpse that healing was possible. I don't know how to stop carrying this. You don't have to stop today. But perhaps, Elizabeth hesitated, perhaps tomorrow can be 1 day less here. And then another, until you come because you want to, not because you feel you must. He nodded slowly, exhausted, as if he had confessed capital crimes. Thank you for not running away after hearing all of this. I promised I would stay, remember? I don't break my promises. Chapter 3. Cautious Approach. Rosalie's letter was urgent and arrived a few days later. Dearest Lizzie, Aunt Prudence won't stop asking questions about your sudden marriage. She's very worried and has been in crisis ever since, not understanding why you went to marry the Earl of Holloway. Everyone knows the horrible rumors about him and what he might do to you. Please come. P.S. She also said terrible things about you having sold yourself. I need to be sure you're happy. Elizabeth found Nicholas in the library, surrounded by botany books. She had discovered it was his refuge in the afternoons when he didn't disappear completely. Sometimes she joined him, embroidering in silence while he read, a companionship without demands that seemed to calm him. I need to go to Bath, she announced. The book about hybrid roses closed abruptly. When are you going? He asked. Tomorrow if possible. Rosalie wrote saying my aunt is in crisis. She's terrified by the rumors about you, worried about my safety. Nicholas stood, going to the window overlooking the abandoned gardens. His posture became more rigid. Of course. It's natural she should be worried. His voice was strangely empty. Take the good carriage. Mary should accompany you as well. Nicholas. She thought about placing her hand on his shoulder, but decided against it. How long will you need? He asked without turning. 3 days, perhaps 4, just to reassure them. Take a week if necessary. He paused. Or perhaps your aunt is right to be worried. Perhaps it would be better if you stayed there. Pardon, what did you say? Elizabeth felt her stomach tighten. He turned slowly, and Elizabeth saw something close to despair in his eyes. I know what they're saying. That you married a madman. That you're in danger. That He swallowed hard. That I did something to Marguerite and will do it to you too. Nicholas, I don't believe... But they believe it. Your aunt, your sister, all of Bath. Actually, even the King of England probably believes it. He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. And perhaps they should. Perhaps you should be afraid of me. Perhaps it would be better to end this arrangement. The firmness in her voice surprised him. I've already fulfilled my part. Your siblings are financially secure. I can arrange for you to live with your aunt, or in London, wherever you prefer. We'll remain legally married to maintain appearances, but you don't need to return to this house. You don't need to return to me. You're dismissing me from the arrangement? She asked incredulously. No, I'm offering you a real choice. He faced her directly. Elizabeth, you don't understand. Everything I touch dies. Marguerite preferred to throw herself from a tower rather than continue by my side. She chose me every day for 3 years, and then one day chose not to choose me anymore. She chose death. This. He pressed his fist against his chest. This opened a hole here that I don't know how to close. Elizabeth felt the air escape her lungs. It wasn't love for Marguerite that haunted him. It was the pain of rejection, of abandonment. You think it was your fault? It was. The answer came quick, convinced. If I hadn't pressed so hard for an heir, if I hadn't shown disappointment each month she didn't conceive, if I hadn't, she was breaking right in front of me and I didn't know how to fix her. In the end, she decided I wasn't worth the effort of staying alive. Nicholas, don't think that way. She left me, Elizabeth. His voice rose for the first time. She wrote that note saying she was freeing me, as if the problem was being trapped with me, as if I were her prison. He turned to the window, shoulders tense. And now you're here because of a business arrangement. Your aunt has every right to be in crisis, to worry, because she sees what's true. You shouldn't be here, not with someone like me. Someone like you? Elizabeth felt anger bubble up. A man who saved my siblings from ruin? Who fulfilled every promise he made? Who treats me with more respect than any supposedly sane man who turned their backs on us? A man in whose housewives die, he said bitterly. Silence filled the library like deep water. Elizabeth processed each word, finally seeing the true wound. This wasn't a man trapped in the past by love. This was a man terrified that there was something fundamentally unworthy about him. Who carried so much guilt he believed the rumors about himself. "May I tell you something about my father?" she asked softly. He didn't respond, but didn't interrupt her either. After he hanged himself, people whispered. They said we were cursed, that there was something wrong with our family. The same people who dined at our table, who laughed at his jokes, suddenly saw us as contaminated. She approached him from behind. I spent weeks wondering what we did wrong. Me, Thomas, Rosalie. Why weren't we enough to make him want to live? Why did he choose to abandon us? Nicholas remained still, but she saw his shoulders tense. But then I understood something. His choice wasn't about us. It was about the pain he didn't know how to process, the shame he couldn't carry, the darkness that had already consumed too much of him to find a way out. Elizabeth touched his back lightly. The people who judged us didn't understand that. They preferred to believe there was something wrong with us. It was easier than accepting that sometimes pain wins. It's not the same thing, he murmured. Isn't it? My aunt is in crisis because she heard rumors, not because she knows you, not because she saw how you treat me. She's terrified by stories told by people who prefer to believe the worst because it's more dramatic than the truth. Nicholas turned slowly, eyes glistening with moisture. And what is the truth? That Marguerite was ill. That melancholy after losing a child is real and can be fatal. That her choice was about the unbearable pain she carried, not about your worth. Elizabeth held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. That you're not a monster, Nicholas. You're a man who suffered a devastating loss and whom the world decided to transform into a villain because it's easier than having compassion. How can you be certain? Because I see you. Not the rumors, not the stories. You. She didn't release his face. And I'm going to Bath so Rosalie can see too. So my aunt understands that the rumors are just that, rumors. But Nicholas, her voice became firm. I'm coming back. Not because I'm obligated, or because we have an arrangement and I need to fulfill my part, but because I choose to return. He closed his eyes, and a tear escaped. And if one day you change your mind, if you look at me and decide it's not worth it, then I will have changed my mind for real reasons, not out of fear or rumors. Elizabeth wiped the tear with her thumb. But that hole in your chest, Nicholas, it won't close by punishing yourself for not having saved her, nor by believing you're the monster people say you are. It will close when you forgive yourself, and when you allow something new to grow around it. They stood staring at each other for long seconds, two wounded hearts trying to understand how to heal. He walked 2 steps toward her. Elizabeth, thank you. For seeing me beyond the rumors, for not being afraid of me. I'm not afraid of you, Nicholas. But I think you're afraid of yourself. When Elizabeth departed the next morning, she found a small package on the carriage seat. Inside, a sapphire brooch, not Marguerite's jewels, but something new, chosen for her. The note said, "So that Bath knows the Countess of Holloway is valued and protected by the Earl of Holloway. So your aunt sees that the rumors lie. You chose me when no one else would, even knowing what they say about me. That courage means more than words can express. Come back to me, Elizabeth." N. Chapter 4. The Buried Truth. Bath received Elizabeth with ceremony and suspicion in equal measure. Aunt Prudence waited at the door of the elegant Georgian house, her face pale with real concern. She grabbed Elizabeth before she had even fully descended from the carriage, examining her from head to toe as if searching for injuries. "Thank God," she murmured, tears in her eyes. "Thank God you're well." "Rosalie has been crying every night, convinced that she couldn't finish. Aunt Prudence, I'm perfectly well. But the rumors, Elizabeth, they say he's violent, unstable, that his first wife." She lowered her voice. "That he pushed her and invented the story about melancholy to escape the gallows." Elizabeth felt anger burn in her chest. "And you believe drawing room gossip about a man you've never met, Aunt?" "They're not just gossip. Lady Hartley was in London when it happened. She said the Earl was questioned by the police for hours, that there were suspicions about him." "Suspicions are not facts." "Elizabeth!" Rosalie came running down the stairs, throwing herself into her sister's arms. At 16, she still had the impetuousness of youth. "Are you well? Did he hurt you? You look different." Elizabeth stepped back so they could see her properly. She wore a new dress of dark green velvet that Nicholas had insisted be made before the journey, the sapphire brooch gleaming at her collar. Her hair was arranged by Mary, who had incredible skill with the brush. She looked, for the first time in months, like a real countess. "I'm more than well," she said firmly. "I'm safe, well cared for, and treated with more respect than I ever received in my own home before Papa's death." "But he's mad," Rosalie insisted. Everyone said Papa was an honorable gentleman," Elizabeth cut in, more harshly than she intended. "Until they discovered the debts. Everyone greeted us on the street until he hanged himself. Then we became pariahs overnight." "Gossip, Rosalie. We learned better than anyone how cruel and often false it can be." Silence weighed in the elegant entrance. Aunt Prudence exchanged glances with Rosalie, both processing the words. "Come in," her aunt finally said more gently. "Tell us everything. The truth, Elizabeth, not what you think we want to hear." Over the following days, Elizabeth told them, not everything. Some of Nicholas's secrets were his alone to share, but enough. She spoke about the arrangement, about the mutual need that united them, about how Nicholas had fulfilled every promise, about the servants he had hired, about the silent but courteous meals, about the pain he carried. "He loved his wife," Elizabeth explained during tea on the third day. "Deeply. She became ill after losing a baby. Melancholy consumed her. He tried to save her and couldn't. And now he carries the guilt of it as if he were responsible for every breath she didn't take." "But the stories about violence," Aunt Prudence insisted, still reluctant. "He has never raised his voice to me, never touched me without permission. He barely enters the same room without announcing his presence first." Elizabeth set down her cup with determination. "The man you describe doesn't exist. He's an invention of people who need villains to entertain their tedious lives." "You defend him very vehemently," Rosalie observed, curious now instead of terrified. "Almost as if what?" "As if you cared about him. Truly, not just out of obligation." Elizabeth opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. Did she care? When had she begun to care? When he played piano with tears in his eyes? When he confessed his failures with brutal honesty? When he let her leave saying perhaps it would be better not to return, but clearly dying of fear that she would obey? "Perhaps I do care," she admitted slowly. "He is kind in his way. Broken, but trying. And after everything we've been through, Who are we to judge someone for being broken? Aunt Prudence sighed, finally seeming to accept. I only want you to be happy, child. And safe. But I am safe, Aunt Prudence. I promise. It was on the last day in Bath that Elizabeth, strolling through the outskirts of the city, spotted a small plant nursery hidden on a side street. She stopped, observing the seedlings organized in colorful rows, and a memory came to mind. Nicholas in the library, bent over that book about hybrid roses, his fingers tracing the illustrations with almost religious reverence. How many times had she found him like that, studying every detail, every variety, like someone memorizing something precious? The dead garden of Holloway rose in her imagination. The dried rose bushes that Marguerite had planted, abandoned to death along with his hope. And suddenly, Elizabeth knew what she needed to do. She entered the nursery with renewed determination. Looking for something specific, milady? The seller asked, wiping his hands on his apron. Roses, various colors if you have them. Seedlings strong enough to survive a new planting. The man guided her to the corner where several healthy seedlings waited, buds still closed, promising magnificent flowers. Elizabeth examined them carefully. Nicholas deserved only the healthiest, those with the greatest chance of flourishing. These will do perfectly. I'll take 2 seedlings of each, she decided, feeling something warm expand in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or purpose. The seller wrapped each one carefully for the journey, tying them with twine. For your garden, milady. Elizabeth looked at the seedlings, still fragile, but full of potential. Like her and Nicholas, perhaps. Broken, but not dead. Capable of growing if someone cared enough to plant, water, wait. For a new beginning, she responded softly, holding the seedlings as if they were hope itself wrapped in brown paper. Rosalie accompanied her to the carriage the morning of departure, her eyes still worried but less terrified. You're really going back to him? Yes, I am, she answered. But why? Thomas and I are safe now. You don't need him anymore. Elizabeth embraced her sister. But it's not right. I gave my word and I'll keep it. But I think he needs me. And perhaps I need him too. You fell in love with him? She asked automatically. I don't know what I feel yet, Elizabeth admitted honestly. But I know I want to find out. And I know I won't abandon him like the rest of the world did. He deserves better than that. The carriage departed with Elizabeth Mary and 10 seedlings of various colors. As Bath disappeared in the distance, Elizabeth felt something strange. Anxiety. Not to stay, but to return. To see Nicholas's face when he saw the roses. To prove she had chosen to return when she could have stayed. Holloway Manor emerged at dusk on the 4th day, its Gothic towers silhouetted against the orange sky. But something was different. Light in the windows, not just one, but several. Smoke rising from the chimneys. Sounds of life. Hughes received her at the door with a discreet smile. Lady Whitmore, what joy your return. The Earl will be relieved. Where is he? In the library, milady, Hughes responded with a discreet smile. Elizabeth walked through the familiar corridors, her heart racing in a way she hadn't expected. The rose seedlings were carefully wrapped in her arms, heavy with promise and meaning. She found him exactly where she had imagined, hunched over the table full of open books, an untouched glass of brandy beside him. He looked like he hadn't slept properly. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled as if he had run his hands through it countless times. Upon hearing her enter, he raised his head abruptly. You came back! The words came out as an exhalation, relief and disbelief mixed. He stood so quickly the chair nearly toppled. You really came back. But I said I would return, Elizabeth responded, feeling her chest tighten at seeing the raw vulnerability in his eyes. I know, but I feared. Nicholas ran his hand through his hair again, a nervous gesture she was beginning to recognize. 4 days seemed like an eternity. I thought your aunt would convince you to stay, that Rosalie would cry, and you wouldn't have the strength to leave again. That? He stopped, swallowing hard. That when you really had the choice, away from here, away from me, you would realize it wasn't worth returning. Elizabeth carefully set down the seedlings on a chair and approached him. My aunt tried to convince me, Rosalie cried. But Nicholas, she held his hands, feeling them tremble. I had already decided before I even arrived in Bath. I decided the moment I departed. He stared at her, as if he didn't dare believe. Why? Why would you return when you could have stayed safe, respectable, away from the rumors about the mad Earl? Because these 4 days showed me something I didn't expect to discover. Elizabeth squeezed his hands. They showed me where I truly wanted to be. Elizabeth, no, let me finish. She took a deep breath. I brought something for you. Well, not exactly for you, but... She hesitated, suddenly nervous. I noticed you spend hours reading about botany. Roses, mainly. So I thought perhaps... She went to the chair and picked up the wrapped seedlings. Perhaps it was time to move from theory to practice. Nicholas looked at the packages, then at her, something breaking in his expression. You brought roses? Various colors, several seedlings. For the garden. Elizabeth extended them to him. For new beginnings, as you said. He took the seedlings with trembling hands, as if they were the most precious things in the world. His voice failed. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Just, she smiled softly. Show me where you want to plant them. I know you've been thinking about it. Nicholas laughed, a wet and surprised sound. I've been thinking of little else these last 4 days. Come. He carefully placed the seedlings back on the chair and offered his arm to her. There's something I need to show you. Elizabeth accepted his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles, the contained anxiety. He guided her through the corridors to the back gardens. When he opened the door, she stopped completely, breathless. The dead garden was no longer dead. The earth was turned over and tools still scattered about. Beds perfectly prepared in organized rows. The old rose bushes had been carefully removed, the soil turned and enriched. 12 beds waited, ready to receive new life. You did this? Elizabeth whispered, incredulous. Nicholas released her arm, suddenly shy. I thought if I prepared everything, if I left it ready for when you returned. He looked at his calloused hands. If you returned, perhaps it would be a beginning. A way of showing that. He stopped, searching for words. That you were waiting for me, Elizabeth completed softly. Yes. The admission seemed to cost him, but there was determination in his voice now. It's time to leave my past in peace. To stop living as if I were already dead too. He looked at the renewed garden. I worked from dawn after your departure until dusk every day. Hughes thought I had gone completely mad. Perhaps I have, but I couldn't stop. Each bed I prepared, each old root I pulled was like... He hesitated, searching for the words. Like pulling out pieces of the pain, like making space for something new to grow. Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes, hot and insistent. Nicholas turned to her, and there was as much fear as hope in his gaze. I spent these 4 days thinking, digging, waiting, and all I could think was, if you returned, perhaps this place could become your home too. Not just a house where you fulfill an agreement, but a real home, where you wanted to be, where you chose to stay. She turned to face him completely, heart racing. Nicholas, look at me. He obeyed, raw vulnerability stamped on every line of his face, on the earth-stained hands that trembled slightly, on the eyes that shone with unshed tears. My aunt offered me a house in Bath. Rosalie begged me to stay. I had every reason in the world not to return. Safety, respectability, distance from the rumors. Elizabeth touched his face gently. But do you know what I realized in those 4 days? What? The question was barely a whisper. That when I thought of home, I didn't think of Bath. I didn't think of the house where I grew up, or the elegance of my aunt's residence. She smiled through tears. I thought of this dark house with its Gothic towers. I thought of the silent meals where you cut your food into perfect pieces but never eat. I thought of the library full of botany books and you reading poetry at dusk. I thought, her voice broke, of you. And I realized that somewhere between desperation and agreement, Between the storm and now, this place became my home. You became my home. Chapter 5. Farewell to Ghosts. The following weeks brought changes that Holloway Manor hadn't seen in years. The various roses were planted on an afternoon of clear skies, with Elizabeth and Nicholas working side by side, hands in the earth, occasional laughter breaking the silence that used to dominate those gardens. He taught with patience how to dig the right-sized hole, how to position the roots, how to press the earth firmly but gently. Like with the heart, he had said without thinking, then blushed. Firm but gentle. In the days that followed, they returned together to the nursery and bought 4 more seedlings, these in shades of coral and peach. Marguerite liked white, Nicholas had commented while choosing. But I think it's time to have other colors here. It was the first time he mentioned his late wife without acute pain in his voice. Only soft melancholy, gradual acceptance. The house came to life in unexpected ways. Mrs. Brennan hummed in the kitchen. Hughes whistled while polishing the silver. Mary laughed while helping Elizabeth choose fabrics to redecorate the sitting room. Cheerful colors, milady. This house has lived in shadows too long. And Nicholas. Nicholas began to smile, small smiles at first, almost embarrassed, as if he had forgotten how. But gradually, something in him thawed. The rigidity in his shoulders diminished. The nightmares that Elizabeth heard through the walls became less frequent. But the white room remained. Elizabeth never asked about the nocturnal visits he still made occasionally. She heard his steps climbing to the 3rd floor, the door opening and closing, the low murmur of one-sided conversation. But the visits were shorter now, and some nights he didn't go up at all. It was on a full moon night, 6 weeks after Elizabeth's return, that everything changed. She woke to the sound of a door slamming. She put on her robe and followed the sound to the 3rd floor corridor. The white room door was wide open, and Nicholas was inside, a candle in his hand, looking around as if seeing the room for the first time. "Nicholas?" She entered cautiously. He turned, and Elizabeth saw tears on his face. But they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of liberation. "I need to do this," he said, voice firm despite the crying. "I need to let her go." Elizabeth approached, standing beside him. "What do you need to do?" "Close this room. Put these things away. Stop." He looked around at the preserved dresses, the roses he brought religiously, the sheet music on the piano. "Stop living as if she were going to return. Because she won't. And his voice broke. "I want to live again, Elizabeth. For the first time in 5 years, I want to truly live." "Are you certain?" He nodded, determined. "You showed me it's possible. That I can carry her memory without being buried by it. That I can honor her by letting her rest, not keeping her trapped here with me." Elizabeth held his free hand. "You don't have to do this alone. Will you stay with me? Always." Together, they began. Nicholas folded each dress with reverence, placing them carefully in cedar chests. Elizabeth wrapped the jewels, the silver brushes, the perfumes. They worked in respectful silence, 2 gravediggers burying a ghost with love. When they reached the piano, Nicholas hesitated. The Moonlight Sonata sheet music was still open, Marguerite's notes in the margins. "She wanted me to be happy," he said softly, fingers tracing her handwriting. "She wrote that in the note. May you find someone who can give you what I could not. I thought it was cruelty at the time. But perhaps," he looked at Elizabeth, "perhaps it was love. Her last act of love. Freeing me. And are you ready to accept that freedom?" Nicholas carefully closed the sheet music, placing it in the chest with the other belongings. "I am. Because you showed me that accepting doesn't mean forgetting. That I can love what we had and still have hope for what I can have." When they finished, the room was empty. Only furniture covered with white sheets, closed windows, respectful silence of a mausoleum. Nicholas stood in the doorway for a long moment, then closed it softly. "Goodbye, Marguerite," he whispered. "Thank you for the years we had. Forgive me for those I couldn't give you. Rest in peace now, I'm finally going to try to do the same." He locked the door and put the key in his pocket. Then he turned to Elizabeth with eyes clearer than she had ever seen. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me I was worth saving." Elizabeth pulled him into an embrace, feeling him tremble against her, tears wetting her shoulder. But they were good tears, of liberation, of new beginnings, of a man finally allowing himself to live. "Now," she said when he pulled away, wiping his face with the back of his hand, "let's go downstairs. Mrs. Brennan made hot chocolate before bed, and we can sit in the garden, see the roses we planted." "Our roses," he corrected softly. "Our roses," she agreed, smiling. They descended together, hands intertwined. Above them, the white room remained closed, not forgotten, but at peace. And for the first time in 5 years, the tower had no ghosts. 3 months later, during a particularly cheerful dinner with Thomas and Rosalie visiting, Nicholas stood abruptly. "There's something I need to say." His voice trembled slightly, but there was determination in it. Elizabeth looked at him, curious and slightly worried. They rarely made formal declarations. "When we married," he began, looking directly at her, "it was a business arrangement. You needed security for your siblings. I needed a wife to keep my inheritance. There was no love, only mutual necessity." Thomas and Rosalie exchanged uncomfortable glances. Elizabeth remained motionless, heart racing. But somewhere between the storm and today, between desperation and hope, between the dead garden and the roses that now bloom, Nicholas knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. "You became more than my wife on paper. You became my companion, my friend, my reason to wake in the morning without fearing the day." "Nicholas," Elizabeth felt tears burn. "Let me finish." He squeezed her hand. "You showed me I wasn't the monster I believed myself to be. That the hole in my chest could heal without disappearing. That I could honor the past without being prisoner to it. And somewhere in that process," he took a deep breath, vulnerable and brave, "I fell in love with you." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Mrs. Brennan, peeking discreetly from the kitchen, was frozen. "I don't expect you to reciprocate," Nicholas continued quickly. "Our arrangement didn't include love. But I needed you to know that you're no longer an obligation or convenience. You're the woman who brought light back to this dark house, who gave me reason to want to live, not merely exist. And if someday you feel something beyond compassion or friendship for me, his voice broke, would be the happiest man in England." Elizabeth looked at him. This man who had begun as a desperate stranger became a cautious ally, and now, "Idiot," she said softly. Nicholas blinked, confused and clearly hurt. "Complete idiot," she repeated, but she was smiling through tears. "Do you think I spent all these months planting roses, redecorating your house, defending your name in Bath, sleeping in this manner when I could have been in London just out of compassion? Do you think my heart raced when you entered a room just out of friendship?" She held his face between her hands. "Nicholas Whitmore, I fell in love with you the moment I saw you preparing 12 beds for 8 roses, perhaps even before. When you played piano crying, when you confessed your failures without defenses, when you offered me freedom, even while dying of fear I would accept it. Elizabeth." The name came out like a prayer. "So yes, you complete idiot." She pulled him up, standing as well. "I love you. I love the broken man who had the courage to mend himself. I love the gardener who dirties his hands with earth. I love the widower who loved so deeply he almost lost himself. And I love the man you're becoming, who smiles, who laughs, who has hope." Nicholas pulled her into a desperate embrace, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," she agreed, laughing through tears. "But you have me anyway." "Forever?" "Forever." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. May I kiss you?" "Truly, not just for appearances. I thought you'd never ask." The kiss was everything a first kiss should be. Hesitant at first, then deep, laden with months of tension and hope and unspoken love. When they separated, both were trembling. "My God," Thomas murmured to Rosalie. "They really love each other." "Of course they love each other," Rosalie whispered back, wiping her own eyes. "Anyone with eyes could see." Elizabeth laughed, hiding her face in Nicholas's chest. He held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, because to him she was. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For choosing me. Every time. When you didn't have to. When you shouldn't have. For choosing me anyway. Always," she promised. "I will always choose you." Outside, in the garden that was no longer dead, 12 rose bushes bloomed under the moonlight. Yellows, corals, peaches. Colors of hope, of new beginnings, of love growing in once barren soil. And in the tower, the white room remained closed, not forgotten, but finally at peace, just like the man who had kept it for so long. Nicholas Whitmore, the Earl everyone called mad, discovered that the cure for broken hearts wasn't forgetting lost love, it was allowing himself to be loved again. And Elizabeth, the woman who had arrived desperate in a storm, discovered that sometimes the best homes are found in the most unlikely places, with the most unlikely people, at the most unlikely moment, but always, always at the right time. Epilogue: Spring at Holloway. 2 years later, Elizabeth Whitmore, at 23 years old, discovered that being a mother was simultaneously the most terrifying and wonderful thing she had ever experienced. The shrill cry coming from the cradle made her smile as she finished tying her robe. April had brought gentle rain during the night, and the aroma of wet earth and roses entered through the open window. There were now 28 rose bushes in the garden, each one planted at a significant moment in their lives together. "Coming, little tyrant," she murmured, approaching the cradle where James Nicholas Whitmore, at 2 months old, demanded attention with the authority of a miniature earl. "Let me get him." Elizabeth turned to find Nicholas in the doorway, sleep-tousled, but with that smile that still made her sigh even after 2 years of marriage. He crossed the room and picked up their son with the confidence it had taken weeks to develop. Nicholas, who had faced ghosts and melancholy, had initially been terrified by the fragility of a child. "Hello, little one," he murmured, rocking him gently. "Waking your mother again? She needs to sleep, you know. She spent 9 months creating you." James stopped crying instantly, fixing his gray eyes, identical to his father's, on Nicholas's face. "He adores you," Elizabeth said, leaning on her husband's shoulder, watching father and son. "The feeling is mutual." Nicholas kissed the baby's forehead, then Elizabeth's. "Do you know what day it is today? Thursday? It's the anniversary of the day you arrived here. Exactly 3 years ago, you knocked on my door in a storm." Elizabeth smiled at the memory. "The night I married the mad Earl, and I married the bravest woman in England." He pulled her closer with his free arm. 3 years. It seems impossible that my life was so empty before you." It wasn't empty. It was waiting. From their room, they could see the garden through the window, an explosion of colors under the morning sun. Yellows, corals, peaches, and now also deep reds that Nicholas had planted when he learned Elizabeth was pregnant. Thomas wrote, Elizabeth mentioned. He said he'll come during summer holidays. And Rosalie is finally engaged. To the Viscount's son, correct? The one who followed her around like a puppy in Bath? That very one, Elizabeth laughed. Who would have thought the Harrington family would rise so well? You saved them. We saved them. Together. James began to whimper again, hunger manifesting itself. "Breakfast time for everyone," Nicholas declared. "I'll take him to the kitchen while you dress. Mrs. Brennan is already preparing those scones you love. With strawberry jam? Of course. And hot chocolate. She insists that nursing mothers need extra pampering." As Nicholas left with James nestled in his arms, murmuring nonsense that made the baby give what might be a smile, or gas, but they preferred to believe it was a smile. Elizabeth stood for a moment at the window. Holloway Manor was no longer the dark and silent house she had found 3 years ago. It was alive, with a child's laughter, with servants who sang, with gardens that bloomed. with love in every room. And on the third floor, the white door remained closed. No longer locked. Nicholas had opened it the previous year, transforming the room into an art studio for Elizabeth. The walls had been painted soft yellow. Light entered freely through previously covered windows. Marguerite's memory was stored respectfully in a cedar chest in the attic, but no longer governed the living. "Elizabeth!" Nicholas called from downstairs. "James is demanding your immediate presence, milady." She smiled, tying her hair as she descended the stairs. At 23 years old, she had a husband who loved her, a healthy son, happy siblings, and a home she had built with her own hands on once barren soil. In the kitchen, she found Nicholas sitting with James on his lap, trying not to laugh while Mrs. Brennan scolded both for invading the kitchen before breakfast is properly set in the dining room. "Sorry, Mrs. Brennan," Nicholas said with that false seriousness he used to provoke the cook. "But my son is tyrannical and my wife is irresistible. I'm a weak man against these forces." "Weak nothing," the cook huffed, but she was smiling. "Go on, out of my kitchen before I chase you out with the wooden spoon." Seated in the sun-bathed dining room, Nicholas fed Elizabeth pieces of scone while she nursed James, a picture of domesticity that would make the bath matrons faint with shock. "Happy?" Nicholas asked softly. Elizabeth looked at her husband, this man who had arrived as broken in her life as she had arrived in his, holding a cup of hot chocolate for her to drink, gray eyes shining with love and contentment. "Immensely," she answered. "You? More than I ever thought possible." He kissed the top of her head. "You saved me, Elizabeth. In every way, one person can save another." "We saved each other," she corrected. "It wasn't heroism. It was choice. Every day, choosing to stay, choosing to love, choosing to grow." James finished nursing and burped spectacularly, breaking the moment with perfect infantile timing. They both laughed. "Definitely your son," Elizabeth teased. "Mine?" That was pure Harrington elegance. From the garden, the aroma of roses entered through open windows. 28 rose bushes, each one a story, each one a fulfilled promise. And in autumn, Nicholas was already planning to plant more. One for James, and perhaps, if luck blessed them again, more for siblings to come. The Earl everyone called mad discovered that the best revenge against rumors was simply to live well, to live completely, to live with love. And the woman who had arrived desperate in a storm discovered that sometimes the best stories begin in the darkest moments. Because it's in darkness that we learn to value light. It's in the dead garden that the most resilient flowers grow. And it's in the broken heart that the deepest love finds roots. Holloway Manor was no longer haunted by ghosts. It was a home. And that, after all, was everything they both had ever needed.